Hello and welcome back to Doctor Who The Cancelled Chronicles. As you saw in the title, we will be discussing the first two real spin-offs of Doctor Who. Let's get into it. Due to the ongoing popularity of the show, it was decided that two different spin-offs would be commissioned for the 35th anniversary of the show. The first is a series about the United Nations Intelligence Task Force, otherwise known as UNIT, and that is what the show would be called. Yes, even with the periods. Created as the brainchild of Terrence Dicks and Barry Letts, UNIT was a spin-off show of Doctor Who designed to be more mature for adults and teenagers. It was done this way to bring that audience into the Doctor Who universe without sacrificing the show's primary demographic, who are children. It would have premiered on BBC Two on September 3rd, 1998. Let's dive into the premise. Set 1 year after the events of Battlefield, with UNIT facing bankruptcy and becoming half public and half privately owned, in order to prevent it from floundering, Brigadier Winifred Bambara, now having to keep a government official and private owner happy, hires Dr. Jonathan Hooper, newly graduated from Cambridge, to help UNIT defend the Earth against alien threats. Initially intended to be purely aliens that UNIT fought as planning began, it was decided to introduce a rival department, the Department of Ministerial Eradication, or DOME, run by the enigmatic minister portrayed by Richard E. Grant. The main cast of Series 1 would feature Angela Bruce as Brigadier Winifred Bambara, Stephen Waddington as Lieutenant Kent Withers, Ioan Gruffydd as Dr. Jonathan Hooper, John Noble as Staff Sergeant William Edwards, and then the recurring cast, Marcus Gilbert, reprising his role as Anselin Apagwalkmai, probably mispronouncing that, but whatever. Richard E. Grant as the Minister, as I stated before, Richard Griffiths as Colonel Dearlove, Isabel Ames as Henrietta Edwards, as well as two unknown teenage actors as Sergeant William Edwards' sons. Guest starring throughout the series would be Nicholas Courtney as General Alastair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart, Elizabeth Sladen as Sarah Jane Smith, John Leeson as K9 Mark III, Tim Roth as Casper Kremlin, and Ian Sears as Brendan Richards. Now let's get into the show properly. The first story is UNIT, written by Nicholas Briggs and Jason Arnott. The year is 1998, and after the events of Battlefield, UNIT has been sued for the destruction of Woolthorpe Castle. To keep the peace and avoid UNIT floundering, the enigmatic minister has agreed for UNIT to be half publicly owned. All decisions must now be approved by both him and the new owner, Casper Kremlin. Can Bambara form a team to please both of them? And just what is DOME? Episode 1 begins, unbeknownst to the audience at the time, with a scene from Episode 6. A hand holds a gun at the members of UNIT. The footage grinds to a halt, and the voice of Dr. Jonathan Hooper states that there is quite a bit of context for this situation, and that he needs to back it up a bit. The footage on screen rewinds, as if rewinding a video, and focuses on a courtroom. A screen caption informs us that it is 6 months earlier. Brigadier Bambara is speaking to a judge. UNIT are being sued for blowing up the castle in Battlefield, a listed Grade 2 building, Woolthorpe Castle. Guilty, comes the verdict, and the punishment will bankrupt UNIT, pay for the cost of repairing the castle. Then the judge is interrupted. Someone, unseen and off-screen, has agreed to step in. It is a change to UNIT. It will now be partially publicly owned, and thus there will be both a government official and a private owner to keep happy. So UNIT cannot go in all guns blazing, and every member of staff will have to be approved by both the boss and the minister official. Bambara is just the figurehead to take the blame when things go wrong now, and she knows it. The court case ends, and Bambara, along with her husband Anselin, is introduced to her new boss, Casper Kremlin. At the time, neither he nor Bambara know who the minister is, and then we cut to the minister's office, a pitch-black room illuminated only by the door open into the hallway. An official-looking man in an army uniform, Colonel Dearlove, though we do not know his name yet, is speaking to someone behind the desk. the minister, though we do not see his face as the camera is behind him looking over his left shoulder at Dearlove. Back at unit, Bambera sits at her desk, head in her hands in frustration. She picks up the telephone and begins to arrange affairs. Slowly but surely, she whittles her way down through interviews with the new owner. Many people are unsuitable for unit, but eventually she finds some. Lieutenant Colonel Kent Withers, a military friend of Bambera's, Dr. Jonathan Hooper, a scientist from Cambridge who came recommended by Liz Shaw, and Mia Travers, a 17-year-old tech genius from Harvard who came highly recommended by the minister. The episode ends with the new team being formally introduced to one another while, in voiceover, Colonel Dearlove and the minister discuss how progress at the Dome is going. The episode would have been relatively praised from fans, just not highly. This was due to the fact that there was a lot of setup for the main premise of the show and the characters we would be following, but it doesn't have much of a story outside of that, but fans were intrigued with the premise anyway. The second story is Automated, written by Joseph Lidster. The Edwards children start at their new school, but why is the food rotting? Meanwhile, a new plastics factory has opened in London. At the suggestion of their new owner, Casper Kremlin, Unit, with the aid of the minister's newly appointed officer, Staff Sergeant William Edwards, investigates. But this incarnation of Unit has never fought this particular enemy before, and only one person can help, the newly promoted Lethbridge Stewart. The voiceover from Hooper continues, explaining that a month had passed before Unit saw any action. 16-year-old William Billy Edwards and his 13-year-old brother George are attending their first day of high school. Their father, Staff Sergeant William Edwards, has recently joined Unit at the insistence of the minister, overriding Bambera's protests. The school day proceeds as normal for the two boys until lunchtime when they discover that food is rotting, even food they brought into school in their own lunchboxes. Meanwhile, Casper Kremlin receives a report from an old friend. At the newly opened plastics factory in town, over 500 members of staff have changed in the last month. After joining the factory, they had become emotionless and waxy. Something is going on, so Casper sends in the newly established unit team, barring Mia Travers, who remains at the base to provide any technical support. On arrival, it is clear that something is wrong. The only non-waxy member of staff, the CEO, is shifty and evasive, but reluctantly allows them to explore. The group separate, Bambera and Hooper, then Withers and Edwards, and both discover to their horror that the staff are being imprisoned and fed by tubes while wax versions of themselves go about their days. Bambera knows of them, having read Unit's files, the Autons, escaping from the factory when they're seen, being chased by over a dozen Autons. They flee back to the unit base where Bambera activates the Greyhound protocol. The following morning, an incredibly official-looking car pulls up outside the unit base. The door opens and from within emerges a familiar man, Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart, promoted to general in the resignation honors list by former Prime Minister John Major, who was defeated in an election year prior. Bambera explains the situation to them. It is a situation that Lethbridge Stewart has been in before, but this time there's no incarnation of the Doctor to help solve the situation. However, Unit does have a scientist and a teenage genius on their staff now. Eventually, with difficulty and from plans left behind by an earlier incarnation of the Doctor, anti-plastic is created. With the help of Lethbridge Stewart, who uses his influence and rank to get Unit back into the factory, the team are able to confront the Nestine consciousness. During a scuffle with the Autons, the anti-plastic falls into the vat containing the Nestine consciousness. The factory explodes, showering the street outside in debris. Unit emerge, battered but undefeated. Back at the unit base, as Bambera and the others debrief with Casper Kremlin, Lethbridge Stewart receives a phone call from a private number, one he seems to recognize. Bambera and the others finish debriefing and return to the lab, where Lethbridge Stewart is waiting to say goodbye. A small gust of wind fills the air even though all the windows are closed, and he turns to face the group. Hooper notices that the plans and ingredients for anti-plastic have been taken. Lethbridge Stewart assures them there is nothing to worry about and that they're safe in the hands of someone he refers to as an old friend. Across London, Staff Sergeant Edwards debriefs with the minister. The story would have been massively praised, despite using a familiar foe and ally, as well as some repetitive story beats to earlier Auton stories. Many thought that this episode showcased the show's premise more and followed the team properly, as well as being intriguing and engaging. The third story is When the World Halts, written by Russell T. Davies. Earth awakens to find 62% of the population have vanished. Only those with O-positive blood remain. Where have the rest of the population gone, and why has time frozen? It's down to Unit, now down to only a third of their staff, to find out. But can the Jadoon be reasoned with. Jonathan Hooper awakens to find that time has stopped. He switches on the television and catches a news report stating that 62% of the world, everyone without O-positive blood, has gone missing, leaving businesses and the government in turmoil. Unit 2 is in chaos. Only Bombera, Hooper, and Staff Sergeant Edwards remain. Everyone else has vanished. The telephone rings. Bombera answers it. Casper Kremlin is on the line. Rhinoceros creatures are stalking the streets, looking for something, and he has been ordered by the Prime Minister to send a unit in to deal with the situation. What remains of the unit convoy arrives at a street in London a short time later. The large rhinoceros creatures are rounding people up, evidently looking for something. Unit try to reason with the Jadoon, who refuse to back down, leading to a large gunfight on the street between the Jadoon and what remains of Unit, who eventually have to retreat to try and reason with the Jadoon. As they do, they fail to notice a blue police box sitting on the corner. The next day, with the Jadoon still on Earth and time still frozen, Bombera and Hooper try to reason with the Jadoon again. This time things are more successful due to an outside force speaking with the Jadoon beforehand. Chaos, however, soon breaks out when a truck labeled Dome steals a Jadoon. The Jadoon desire revenge, but Bombera gives a sworn promise to find and retrieve the missing Jadoon, if and only if the Jadoon restore the Earth and let time continue. The Jadoon agree and restart time, restoring humanity. They leave Earth, giving Bombera a device to contact them when their Jadoon brethren have been found. Meanwhile, driving the van that stole the Jadoon, Staff Sergeant Edwards arrives at the Dome facility. It is revealed only to the audience that Dome have been stealing and brainwashing Jadoon, and that they have been searching for an alien criminal on Earth. The story would have been relatively praised by fans. Some things were considered confusing at points, but many liked the overall story. While some liked the references to the Doctor, some felt that they were unnecessary and detracted from the rest of the show, and provided an easy end to the overall story. The fourth story is The Chronoid of Kent, written by Nicholas Briggs. Sarah Jane Smith is one of the few people who can say she fought the Chronoid and lived, but that was 22 years ago. Now she lives in Morton Harwood with her late aunt's ward, Brendan, and her robot dog, K9. So why are Unit contacting her now, and what does the Chronoid want? Unit arrive at a research facility in Peterborough, having been summoned by a friend of Jonathan's. Inside, Dr. Percival P. Pendragon introduces them to a recent find from Antarctica, a plant pod that's been hibernating for millions of years. While the others do not recognize it, Bombera, having read Unit files, does. Immediately, the research facility is quarantined. In Morton Harwood, Sarah Jane Smith picks up the phone, learning that Unit requires her help. She refuses, stating that she hasn't worked for Unit since the Doctor dumped her back in 1976. Back at the research lab, angry at being shut down, Dr. Pendragon continues his work. The Chronoid grows. Bombera informs her that a Chronoid has just been unearthed from Antarctica. Sarah Jane agrees to help, and she and K9 leave to assist. By the time they have met Unit at the research facility, Kent has been completely swallowed by the Chronoid, and Unit, at the advice of Sarah Jane, who remembers how to fight it, have to fight their way in to rescue the scientists inside. Eventually, after a climactic battle in which Dr. Pendragon throws himself into the Chronoid to continue his research for all eternity, the rest of the scientists are saved. At Sarah Jane's advice, Bombera calls in a bomb strike destroying the Chronoid, but also destroying large parts of Kent on the way. Realizing the Doctor was in fact right that Unit was too gun-heavy and reckless without the Brigadier around, Sarah Jane and K9 leave in disgust. The story would have been considered one of the best of the series, if not the best. The overall plot, villain, effects, and the cameos from Sarah Jane and K9 were heavily praised, as well as the more episodic format without the relation to the overall arc of Dome this series. The fifth story is The Sontaran of Tunguska, written by Mark Platt. The Tunguska scroll is kept in the Black Archive for good reason. If used incorrectly, it can destroy the world. So what do the Sontarans want with it, and what does Dome want with the scroll? We start with the Minister, sitting at his desk in Dome, giving instructions to Staff Sergeant William Edwards and Colonel Dearlove. We do not hear the instructions, nor do we see the Minister, but we do see Edwards and Dearlove nodding. The twosome leave. At Unit headquarters, Bombera and the others are being interrogated by an annoyed Casper Kremlin, who is having to explain to government officials as to why half of Kent was bombed. His explanation is cut off by reports of living potatoes attempting to break into the Black Archive. From reports, Bombera is able to identify them as Sontarans. When Unit reaches the Black Archive, the door has been forced open, and the lights inside are flickering on and off. Slowly but surely, they descend inside, only to be separated by a strange black mass. fighting their way through their worst fears, Bombara seeing herself never return home, Edwards seeing his loyalty to Dome being exposed, Withers seeing himself die in battle, Hooper seeing himself as dumb, and Mia seeing herself as a failure to her family. The group are then reunited just in time to see a Sontaran steal the Tunguska scroll and teleport away. Though we never learn this fact, nor do any of the characters except the Sontaran itself, not even the audience, the truth here is that the Sontaran has stolen it for the minister who had quote-unquote promised to let him go if he did. The Black Archive begins to rumble around them, requiring them to flee for their lives. As they escape, the Black Archive explodes. It then cuts to the minister's office with the Sontaran dead on the ground. He orders some people to take it away, but we as the audience never figure out why he was killed and why he was after the scroll. The story would have been considered one of the weaker ones of the series. Many found it to be not too terribly interesting, and were a bit confused on the overall ending to the story and how the minister factored into it. The sixth and final story is The Betrayal of Mia Travers, written by Ian McLaughlin and Claire Bartlett. The Raxacoricophalopatorians make their move on London, endangering the lives of millions, and Staff Sergeant William Edwards is going to have to make a choice: the minister or his children. And just what does the minister want with Mia Travers? Episode 6 begins with everything coming together, when the Raxacoricophalopatorians, who have been hinted at throughout the series with the rotting food at the school and small comments from the minister, make their move on London, endangering the lives of millions. Unit is called to resolve the situation. As they do so, they briefly pass a reporter, Franklin Lambert, who accosts them. The situation does not go well during the confrontation, which occurs at the children's school. Staff Sergeant William Edwards' loyalty to Dome is revealed when Colonel Dearlove threatens his children if he refuses to obey. But more chaos threatens to tear Unit apart. Mia Travers threatens Unit with a gun, which is where we started with episode 1, revealing that she is a spy for the minister who has been keeping him informed of everything going on at Unit, and that, unbeknownst to the minister, she has been working with the Raxacoricophalopatorians to crash the moon into the Earth so that she and they can sell the planet in pieces and become obscenely wealthy in the space markets. When Dearlove tells her to shut up since she is ruining a hostage situation, he is shot by Mia. The Raxacoricophalopatorians are gunned down, and Staff Sergeant William Edwards guns down Mia at the same time. We fade to black on a shot of Mia's hand hitting the floor, the gun falling at her side as the school explodes. When we emerge, it is Mia's funeral. Colonel Dearlove, bandaged though alive after being shot by Mia, is standing distantly away while Unit stands at the grave with Mia's family. Staff Sergeant William Edwards stands a short distance away. Bombara is approached by a man from the Downtime Foundation. Staff Sergeant William Edwards' phone rings. Unit is called to a situation of a rampaging mammoth on the M25. They leave in a Unit convoy. Colonel Dearlove watching them go. We follow the car for a moment, then return to Dearlove, or rather his feet. A man with a cane appears next to him and pan up to finally reveal the entirety of the minister. Together, they watch Unit's convoy drive away. The minister announces that they need to step up our plans for the world. Travers has already let me down. Bombara could be useful, though. Keep an eye on her for me, won't you, Colonel? He then nods. The story would have been considered mixed from fans. Some felt that the reveal was a bit too out of nowhere despite the foreshadowing in terms of the villains, and that Mia Travers' betrayal was used as a twist for twist's sake, as well as the actual story being a bit too anticlimactic in terms of the defeat for the Raxacoricophalopatorians. However, some parts were still praised. The first series would have been overall praised. While some fans didn't like the minister with the overarching story rather than an episodic format, it was still considered a massive success and the ratings were very high. With this, the BBC quickly greenlit a second series. Moving on to Unit Series 2. Angela Bruce found the filming of the first series of Unit rather stressful, and for the condition of her return for a second season, demanded a smaller role. Her character status was reduced to recurring for the season, though she would still appear in the credits of every episode, even though she physically only appeared in 2 full episodes, with a cameo in the opening scene of the first episode. At the time, John Noble had also chosen to leave, requiring him to be written out at the end of the second season. Also introduced were 2 new characters, a liaison officer to brief the press and spin the truth for the public, Francois Lavelle, portrayed by Dorota Ray, and a reporter for the London Chronicles, Franklin Lambert, portrayed by Richard Garnett. The first story is Revenge of the Nestine, written by Ian McLaughlin and Claire Bartlett. With the Unit still recovering from Mia Travers' betrayal, Bombara goes missing and a dangerous and secret cargo gets hijacked. Francois Lavelle, Unit's new public liaison officer, finds herself having to cover for Unit when a reporter, Franklin Lambert, starts sniffing around. Just what do the Autons want with this cargo? Unit is struggling to recover from the revelation of William Edwards' former loyalty and the betrayal of Mia. Bambara arrives at Unit headquarters to find a new member of staff, whom she has hired personally, Francois Lavelle, a liaison officer, to make up excuses to cover Unit's activities with the reporters at the scenes of events. Francois does not believe in aliens. Later that afternoon, heading home from Unit, Bambara goes missing. Her car is found at the side of the road a few hours later. The following morning, with Staff Sergeant William Edwards temporarily in charge, Unit is called to an emergency. A shipment of plastics was stolen from a truck, which was blown up outside a hospital. Franklin Lambert, the reporter from the school who works for the London Chronicles, is already on the scene when they arrive, requiring Francois to give a briefing to the press before allowing the others inside. Inside the hospital, Unit immediately realizes they're in trouble. Autons are everywhere, though Francois believes they're just students messing around. The briefing she gave to the press. However, when they are attacked by an Auton who steps into the hall before them, and she witnesses Staff Sergeant William Edwards gunning down an Auton, which proceeds to get up and chase after them, she is forced to admit that aliens do in fact exist. Descending into the bowels of the hospital and passing the bodies of numerous slaughtered nurses and patients, the truth is revealed. Deep inside, recovering from the last encounter, is the Nestine consciousness. During the event, the minister attempts to contact Staff Sergeant William Edwards, who rejects the call. Without anti-plastic, the only option this time is nuclear one. Blow up the hospital. They set charges with Staff Sergeant William Edwards gunning down any Autons they approach. Unit escapes by the skin of their teeth as the hospital explodes behind them. The story would have been massively praised and a great opener for the second series. Many liked the new character in Lavelle, as well as the overall story and characterization. However, some felt that the use of the Autons was a bit tired, and they didn't like how Bambara went missing. The second story is Freedom or Death, written by Jonathan Clements. With Bambara still missing, Colonel Kent Withers steps up as Unit's acting leader. When bizarre occurrences begin happening in Scotland, he and Francois Lavelle investigate. But just what are the Hydra and the Basilisk from Greek myths doing in Scotland, and what do Dome and the Minister want with them? And why has Franklin Lambert followed Unit to Scotland? Bambara is still missing, and having alienated the Minister, Staff Sergeant William Edwards has lost the only chance he ever had at being in charge of Unit. Colonel Kent Withers steps up as the highest ranking member of staff in Bambara's absence. A call arrives from the owner of Unit, Caspar Kremlin, who sends Unit to Scotland. Reports of basilisks and hydras from Greek mythology have come in. Unit heads off. We cut to the London Chronicles office where Franklin Lambert is talking with his boss, who commands him to find out the truth of Unit and sends him to Scotland after a quote-unquote mystery source tips them off that is where Unit is going. Upon arrival, Unit finds the town of Edinburgh abandoned, and mythological creatures from Greek mythology are rampaging around. They are not the only problem, though. Colonel Dearlove is there too. The minister wants the creatures, but what for? Over the course of their investigations, they find out. The minister is stealing aliens to drain their energy to power a machine. A climactic battle occurs between Unit and the Basilisks and the Hydras, resulting in Colonel Dearlove managing to capture one of each during the distraction and escape with them. Meanwhile, from the bushes, unbeknownst to Unit, Franklin Lambert has recorded the whole thing. Unintentionally meeting the Basilisk's gaze reflected in a puddle, Francois Lavelle is petrified, though she is restored when the Basilisks and Hydras are destroyed by Unit. The episode ends with Unit battle-worn and weary, watching as Franklin Lambert escapes with the footage he has recorded. The story would have been massively praised, considered a fun episode, more attuned to a fantasy adventure like Terror of the Zygons and the Time Monster. The third story is The Longest Night, written by Joseph Lidster. The Unit team are enjoying a well-deserved night out in London when suddenly suicide bombers strike. Just why is there a string of killers rampaging in the streets, and how many more will have to die before the night is out? On a night out, after several stressful months, Unit find themselves roped into a situation when a suicide bomber strikes, blowing up a building. Then a second occurs, followed by a third and a fourth. Why are people blowing themselves up? While Unit investigates and Francois covers it up to the press and police, the truth comes out. The minister is testing a device to mind control people, and to make matters worse, the former deceased member of Unit, Mia Travers, was the first test puppet for it, hence why the minister recommended her to Unit in the first place. A confrontation between Unit and Dearlove, who is there on orders from the minister, occurs with Dearlove escaping by teleporting back to England with the data on the mind control of the suicide bombers. Unit is left in shock. Has what happened to Mia happened to Bambara as well? The story would be praised but considered a bit too dark at certain points with the subject matter. Many felt that the idea of suicide bombers should have been handled better. However, despite this, many thought it was an intriguing episode and possibly the best of the series. The fourth story is Dominion, written by Jason Arnott. UNIT are fending off a spate of unusual alien invasions. Assisting their scientific advisor, Jonathan Hooper, is a man he's never seen before, claiming to be the Doctor. General Lethbridge Stewart can vouch for him, but after Mia's betrayal, can UNIT trust anyone? A spate of alien invasions are occurring all throughout the country for reasons unknown to UNIT, who are spread thin, barely seeing each other as their days go on, until at last, help arrives in the form of a blue 1960s police box, and a man calling himself the Doctor. He knows Lethbridge Stewart, who is able to vouch for him when the police box is mentioned, outright named as the TARDIS, and that the man's appearance is different to on record, something which Lethbridge Stewart confirms is to be expected from the Doctor. However, can Lethbridge Stewart genuinely be trusted, or is he under the control of whatever controlled Mia too? Is everyone in UNIT? Everyone in the world? The paranoia of UNIT is riding high. The Doctor, who never actually appears on screen, always obtaining something from inside his box, eventually helps defeat the various aliens who are arriving on Earth, helping them return home so that they do not fall into the hands of the Minister, before vanishing in his TARDIS. It is never expressly confirmed, since the Doctor is never seen on screen, as to whether it actually is the Doctor or whether it is the Master, the Ronnie the Monk, or some other Time Lord or alien posing as the Doctor to obtain knowledge for their own good. The story would have been seen as mixed. While some liked the idea of the Master or another Time Lord using the Doctor as a disguise for UNIT, many felt that since he wasn't seen, it was a bit eye-rolling even if it was actually the Doctor. Many wanted to see Jacoby or O'Mara or any other incarnation of any other Time Lord be included in the episode and either be a main threat or attached to the threat. Many found the episode somewhat intriguing in terms of the paranoia-stricken Hooper, though, and showed Grufford's talents as an actor. The fifth story is Downtime, written by Mark Platt. At the request of intrepid reporter Sarah Jane Smith, General Lethbridge Stewart comes out of retirement to help her investigate New World University, a sinister school run by none other than the missing Brigadier Bombera, and a gateway to Earth by the great intelligence which has taken her over. When things go drastically wrong, UNIT find themselves having to resolve the situation while dodging Franklin Lambert. At the funeral of Mia Travers, Brigadier Bombera was contacted by a mysterious man. A year later, in the present day, Bombera is now the Vice-Chancellor of New World University. New World is an institution that claims to offer spiritual guidance to distraught youth. In reality, New World is the center of operations for the intelligence's plan to conquer the Earth by infecting the global network of computers. Both the administration and students await the coming of a quote-unquote new world that will be heralded by the arrival of the Chancellor, the intelligence-possessed Anselin, Bombera's husband. Bombera's motives are well-meaning but misguided, having been manipulated with a promise of the light of truth. The students themselves have been brainwashed through their computer courses and are slaves of the intelligence. The intelligence needs a final missing locus to attain its goal. It believes it is in the possession of General Lethbridge Stewart. It is actually with his daughter Kate and grandson Gordon on their narrowboat. New World attempts to gather information on Lethbridge Stewart by requesting an investigation by Sarah Jane Smith. Sarah lies about her knowledge of Lethbridge Stewart and later warns both him and UNIT. The intelligence then arranges a meeting between Lethbridge Stewart and a corrupt UNIT captain named Cavendish. Throughout the story, Lethbridge Stewart is aided by a New World student named Daniel Hinton, a former student of his from Brendan Public School. The intelligence's conditioning failed on Hinton, though at times he is still under its influence and at one point becomes a Yeti. He can communicate with Lethbridge Stewart through the Bardo or astral plane. UNIT plays a very small part in the story, with only Bombara taking a major role. The rest of UNIT only feature when they arrive at the end, summoned by Lethbridge Stewart to free Bombara from the Great Intelligence's influence and take her to the hospital. Reporter Franklin Lambert, who is a rival of Sarah Jane, who is much better than him in all and every way, dogs Lethbridge Stewart throughout the story, trying to find out what is going on and get an exclusive interview. It would have been obviously adapted from the story with the same name, but tweaked to fit into this continuity, with Bombera replacing Victoria and adding the subplot with Lambert. This would have been considered the weakest of the season, but still a good episode. Some felt that without the inclusion of UNIT, it hindered the episode despite getting Bombera back. Many felt it was lazy to essentially redo Downtime despite a bigger budget, as fans thought the idea didn't work here. However, some story beats were praised, and many liked seeing Lethbridge Stewart back along with Bombera. The sixth and final story is The Wasting, written by Ian McLaughlin and Claire Bartlett. Bombera is back on duty, and it's just in time. A mysterious plague has hit the world, and with Dome advancing, the Edwards family are not going to come out of this in one piece. When a mysterious plague hits the world with over 75% of the population suffering from it and at least a third of the population dead already, UNIT is called in to deal with the situation. For Staff Sergeant William Edwards, it's personal. Both his sons are gravely ill with the situation. When UNIT arrive at the hospital from Revenge of the Nestine, which has been rebuilt after being blown up, they find out why none of the governments of the world are helping. The minister has activated his mind control device to control them, wipe out humanity, and drain them of their energy to fuel a spaceship to allow him to return home to the planet Moraxia. With his own team of soldiers, the minister marches on UNIT, eradicating many unnamed soldiers, and takes control of UNIT, disbanding the team. The team, currently trapped in a room, finds that it is being pumped full of toxic gas to finish them off. Now no longer bound by the rules, Staff Sergeant William Edwards takes matters into his own hands. He helps Bombera and the others escape from a room being flooded with gas, but as he does so, one of the plague-ridden patients in the hospital reaches for them and breaks the outer button to seal the door, meaning it can only be sealed from the inside. He sacrifices himself, telling Bombera to tell my wife and boys I love them. All Bombera and the others can do is watch as the room fills with gas and Staff Sergeant William Edwards and the patients are killed. We cut from Bombera's horrified face to the rest of the team reeling in shock and fade to black. When we return, we see Bombera and the team storming the UNIT headquarters and regaining control, throwing the minister out. Then we cut to the same place as the end of Series 1. The graveyard. UNIT all stand at the grave of Staff Sergeant William Edwards. Bombera orders a 40-gun salute in his honor, and his two sons, now 17 and 14, cry as the coffin descends. Edwards' wife, Henrietta, asks a nearby reporter, Franklin Lambert, to find out what her husband was really doing, since anything about UNIT is classified. He agrees to find out for her. UNIT, however, reluctantly leaves when Bombera is informed by Casper Kremlin that a herd of vampire bats have been spotted in Lincolnshire. We end on a spot similar to Series 1. The minister and Colonel Dearlove speaking, making plans for world domination, though we do not hear any of it, for we only see it through the back window of the car that Bombera and the others are leaving in. The story would have been considered the best of the series and promised more intriguing story beats for the next series, as well as an explosive climax, redemption for Edwards, and an overall great story. The second series would have been considered another big success, although the ratings and reception wasn't as high as the first season. Despite this, the BBC greenlit not only a Series 3, but a Series 4 as well. After not having a huge role in this series, Angela Bruce stated that she would come back as a main character for the third series, and that Brian Cox would replace John Noble as a new corporal character, loyal to the minister. Now we have the next spinoff. Now going back a bit for the other spin-off to be released in 1998, Jago and Litefoot. Due to the recent newfound popularity from the Doctor Who serial Crimson, Jago and Litefoot got their own spin-off as well. It was going to be released in 1997, but due to various reasons it was held off until 1998, mainly because it was Doctor Who's 35th anniversary and they wanted to truly celebrate the milestone as much as possible. So the two spin-offs were released the same year to celebrate the universe of Doctor Who. It was originally intended to be an ongoing series, but due to the age of the actors to play Jago and Litefoot, Christopher Benjamin and Trevor Baxter, it was decided that a miniseries would be a bit more proper instead. Joining them would be Conrad Asquith as returning character Percival Quick, as well as a new character named Ellie Higson, played by Lena Headey. The showrunner would be Justin Richards due to his impressive work on Doctor Who, and it would air on BBC Two, just like UNIT. The intro would look something like this. However, it would be Hetty's name instead of Lisa Bowerman. So let's get into it. This should be rather quick. The first story is The Bloodless Soldier, written by Justin Richards. A group of soldiers return from overseas service, but they have brought a terrible evil back with them. As death strikes on the streets of London, Sergeant Quick calls upon the help of Professor Litefoot while an old enemy lurks in the shadows. Jago and Litefoot are on the trail of the Bloodless Soldier, and tragedy will hit close to them. This story would be an adaptation of the Big Finish story of the same name, obviously with some necessary tweaks. The episode was massively praised. Many loved seeing the two fan-favorite characters again in their own right, as well as Hetty garnering a lot of praise as new character Ellie. All four main characters held a rather ordinary plot to a higher regard because of this. The climax was also praised. The second story is The Bell of a Devil, written by Alan Barnes. A body is found on the Circle Line, wearing full-dress uniform. It was identified as Reginald Colville, a man who was certified dead some 6 weeks ago. In an attempt to solve the mystery, Jago and Litefoot become unwilling body snatchers, and thus begins a chain of events that will pit them against killer Bulgers and the mysterious machinations of the Far-Off Travelers Club. Same with before, it would adapt the story of the same name with some tweaks. The story was also praised. It was more of an intricate plot than last time, and while confusing at points, was worth the payoff. However, some felt it was weaker than the previous story. The third story is The Spirit Trap, written by Jonathan Morris. Ellie Higson believes that spiritualist Mrs. Vanguard can hear the voices of the dead, but Henry Gordon Jago thinks it's all superstition and theatrical trickery. But if Vanguard is a harmless fake, then why have some of those who have attended her seances disappeared so mysteriously? Jago and Litefoot investigate and find themselves facing a deadly foe from the afterlife. It would again be adapted and tweaked from the original story. The story would again be praised, but more so for its characterization rather than its story. Many felt that Hetty showed her acting chops here, dealing with the events from the first episode, and really grew as a character, as well as the characterization for Jago and Litefoot in the rather fantastical story setting. The fourth and final story is The Similarity Engine, written by Andy Lane. When Jago takes a tumble on an unseasonably icy road, he ends up in the hospital. But this is no ordinary medical establishment, and the patients are suffering from no ordinary illnesses. At last, the fiendish scheme of Dr. Tulp is drawing to its cataclysmic climax. The Similarity Engine is operational, and a new, improved model of the Mahogany murders have been unleashed. This would feature flashbacks to another story called The Mahogany Murders, which was a companion Chronicles story. Since that story is pretty integral to this story, I decided to add that in as flashbacks, with the more important story beats with the villain being showcased here. The story would have received praise. It was considered the weakest of the four, but still an intriguing storyline with a good villain. So, with this, Jago and Litefoot would have been a huge success with fans, with many wanting more of the series. While it would never become an ongoing series, the cast and crew involved did say that it could be brought back if the BBC optioned for it. But that's all for this video. See you next time with the Ninth Doctor's final 2 seasons. See you then.